Hello and welcome back to Bookish. Today I thought I would do another booktube tag. This tag is called the Hobbies and Pastimes tag, and I saw it on Old Blues Chapter and Verse channel where I go a lot. I'll leave a link to his video down below. I really like his booktube channel, and if you haven't checked him out, I really think you should go over there. He's got some really good videos and really interesting discussions. He got the tag from Marc Nash, and I'll leave a link to his video where he created the tag down below as well. So essentially what the tag asks you to do is to think of examples, in the actual question says best examples of various pastimes and hobbies that you find in books. And so I saw, like I said, I saw this on Old Blues Chapter and Verse channel, and I thought, you know what, that looks like fun, mainly because it makes you think about books you've read in the past. It kind of makes you think about all the books you liked and why you liked them, and you have to think about them to find an example of all these things. And I'm pretty sure I did. I think I took the cheap way out a couple of times. But there are 12 or 13 categories, so it was kind of hard to come up with all of them. Anyway, so the first hobby or pastime is sports, and you're supposed to pick a novel with the best representation of a sporting event or a sport. Well, I'm not sure if it's the best representation of any sport, but this book, London Fields by Marc Nash, has the best representation of darts as a sport that I've ever read. And this is actually my favorite Marc Nash book. The main character is a really terrible person who does really terrible things, but he's also getting ready for a national dart tournament because he's a dart player. One reason why this meant so much to me was that I read this a few years after my wife and I took our first trip abroad. We went to Ireland, and while we didn't exactly have jet lag, we both had a hard time sleeping, so we stayed up and we watched, I guess the World Championship of Darts was on TV every night, and so I kind of got into watching darts, and this book has a good depiction of at least a dart thrower player in it. And so that's the book I picked for sports, London Fields by Marc Nash. The second pastime or hobby was music. And so you're supposed to pick a book with a composer or the best depiction of a composer. I went probably pretty easily with Cloud Atlas. There is a long section about a composer and the composition of a piece of music in Cloud Atlas, and the piece of music is called Cloud Atlas. And that kind of actually forms the backbone of the plot. I chose Cloud Atlas as my choice by David Mitchell as my choice of a book with a composer in it. The third hobby or pastime on the list was collecting. For collecting, I just picked one of the Aubrey Maturin novels by Patrick O'Brian. There are 21 of these. There was a movie made called Master and Commander: The Far Side of the World. There are a number of books in the series, and I have to be honest with you, this is a book series that I have loved for a long period of time. And I've read all of them except for, I think, the uncompleted 21st book, and so, these are characters I know a lot about. Dr. Maturin in the books is a doctor. He's the medical doctor on a British Navy ship. He's also a naturalist, and he's a spy, and as a naturalist he collects specimens of all kinds of plants and animals. He's my collector, and this is a novel, or these are novels I should actually say, which have a character who is a collector of things. He's a collector of strange flora and fauna from around the world, which, his job as a ship's doctor gives him an opportunity to travel widely. The fourth category was to choose a novel with great cooking scenes or great dining scenes. And as soon as I read great dining scenes, I thought of the eating contest in 100 Years of Solitude, in which one of the characters, let's see, his name is Aureliano Segundo. Anyway, he was in the book, he's well known for all of his appetites, appetite for food just being one of them, and he gets involved in a days-long eating contest with a woman whose nickname is the Elephant because of her size, and they eat all kinds of things. As a matter of fact, Aureliano Segundo almost dies from his refusal to give up in this eating contest. And so as soon as I heard of saw a dining scene was acceptable under the cookery question, the cookery part of this pastimes and hobbies tag, I thought, well, I'm definitely going to pick 100 Years of Solitude. The fifth category where you're supposed to pick a book is you're supposed to pick a book about art, a work of art or artist. And this is one of those where I think I kind of, took the easy route, because I picked The Goldfinch by Donna Tartt. And this entire novel is about the changing hands of this painting, which is an actual painting called The Goldfinch. And it is central to the story of this book. In regards to how you feel about Donna Tartt or her books, or this book in particular, which does have a tendency to be rambling and a little unwieldy, there's no doubt that The Goldfinch is the central kind of linchpin of the plot here. So I took an easy one here about art, and I chose The Goldfinch by Donna Tartt as my example of a novel that centers around art or an artist. By the way, there's another book in my list that I also thought about choosing for this, a book which I like better. So the sixth category in which you're supposed to pick a book is you were supposed to pick a book which depicts scenes of hunting or fishing. Well, if you've seen my top 10, you know I'm a mostly unapologetic lover of The Sun Also Rises, and a fan of Ernest Hemingway's work, particularly his early work. And there are fishing scenes here where Jake Barnes and Bill Gordon go fishing in a Spanish river for trout, and those fishing scenes to me were some of the best and most beautiful parts of the novel. This fishing scene between Barnes and really his most unaffected friend Bill Gordon are refreshing, and I think I've even read somewhere that they're intended to provide that kind of respite for the characters to kind of cleanse themselves after all the kind of terrible stuff they've witnessed and been involved in Spain. Anyway, as a Hemingway fan and as someone who loves fishing, those fishing scenes in The Sun Also Rises were particularly affecting to me, and I chose Hemingway's The Sun Also Rises as my example of a book with great hunting and fishing scenes. The seventh category in which you're supposed to pick a book was gardening. And I had a really hard time thinking of a book in which characters were gardeners, but then I remembered that I had this book which is kind of almost a children's book called The Man Who Planted Trees. And this is about a man in France who goes around essentially planting acorns. And it's got all these great woodcut pictures in it. And this man named Bofiga travels around France sometime in the years after World War I, planting acorns over and over again. And at first when you meet him, the narrator of the story even thinks he might be a little bit crazy. But over time, after Bofiga dies, the narrator goes back to the country where he planted all those acorns, and he finds that the hills were covered with trees, and that the man had really restored that part of France and the beauty of that part of France. And so I've always thought that was a really beautiful story. And so I'm going to use this as my book with scenes devoted to gardening. The eighth category was a book about bird watching. This is the one which gave me the most trouble. And I'm sure as soon as I finish this video, I'm going to turn around, I'm going to walk towards my bookcase to put the books back I pulled to show in this video, and I'm going to find a book which is much better about bird watching. I considered just kind of taking the easy way out and saying The Raven and holding up a copy of the collected works of Edgar Allan Poe, but instead I chose Haruki Murakami's The Wind-Up Bird Chronicle. There are definitely birds in the book, but one of the characters, a young woman who the main character becomes friends with, refers to him as Mr. Wind-Up Bird, and she watches him. So I'm going to count that as bird watching, and I don't know how you feel about Murakami, mainly because I don't know how I feel about Murakami. Anyway, The Wind-Up Bird Chronicle by Haruki Murakami is my book I chose for bird watching because the main character is called Mr. Wind-Up Bird, and another character watches his activities. And by the way, it's a good thing for him that she does. Category 9 of Hobbies and Pastimes was Genealogy. So you're supposed to pick a book which covered several generations of a family. And I just finished reading a book which I thought fit this category very well, and a book, if you've seen my review, that I think is a great book, and that's Gilead by Marilynne Robinson, which essentially traces the lives and the relationships of three preachers, grandfather, son, and grandson, who are all Congregationalist ministers in Kansas and Iowa during and in the years after the Civil War up through about the years following World War I. It's a really great book and a really beautifully crafted story, and it fits the category of genealogy because of those three generations, so I chose Gilead by Marilyn Robinson. The next category of hobbies and pastimes you were supposed to pick a book to represent was modeling. And the instructions that I saw said specifically about miniatures, and this was really something that kind of had me stumped for a little while until I realized that I just recently read Moonglow by Michael Chabon, and in that book, the main character, or one of the main characters, the grandfather character, created models of space stations on other planets that NASA actually used. He created these miniature models of space stations on the moon and other things, and NASA actually used those things, and it plays a fairly important role in understanding the character of the grandfather in the book. So I was kind of happy that I was just looking through my shelf and I saw Moonglow by Michael Chabon, and I thought, this is the book that definitely has modeling in it. So I chose Moonglow by Michael Chabon as my example of a book with a character who participates in the pastime or the hobby of modeling. The next category was homebrewing or bootlegging, and I know that this is the easy way out book. I just chose The Great Gatsby. Gatsby and Meyer Wolfsheim are definitely bootleggers. That's how they make their money. You know, this category also said you could have scenes of unlicensed drinking. Well, if you haven't read The Great Gatsby, I have a hard time imagining that. But The Great Gatsby is filled with scenes of unlicensed and illegal drinking. And so I admit I took the cheap way out, and I chose The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald as my example that fit the category of a novel that dealt with home brewing or bootlegging. The next category of pastimes or hobbies, where you're supposed to pick a book that kind of had a great example of that pastime or hobby in it, was gambling. And I chose one of my absolute favorite books by Honoré de Balzac, and that's The Black Sheep. The Black Sheep, the plot of The Black Sheep in many ways hinges on gambling. It's the story of two brothers, one who is reckless and a gambler and, you know, lives his life to satisfy his own personal urges and vanity and ego, and another brother who always does the right thing. The older brother ruins the family time and again. He takes money from his indigent mother. He takes money from their house servant who has very little, and he gambles it all away, while the younger brother works hard to become an artist and save the family's money. The brother finds his money and gambles it away, and then in the end, the family is saved by essentially buying a lottery ticket and winning the lottery. So I couldn't think of a better book that I liked more, that contained or discussed or centered on the hobby or pastime of gambling than The Black Sheep by Balzac. By the way, I also thought about choosing this as my example of a book about an artist. If you've seen my top 10, you know that I really am a fan of the work of Balzac, and this is one of my favorite Balzac novels. So almost in keeping with the theme of 19th century French literature, the last category you were supposed to choose a book from was a book that represented cosplay or disguises, and I chose The Red and the Black by Stendhal. The main character in this book is a young man named Julien Sorel, who pretends to be several different types of person. He doesn't wear a physical disguise, but he pretends to be a religious curate. He pretends to be, you know, someone studying to be a priest, and when that doesn't work out because he has an affair with the wife of the family that he's tutoring the kids of, then he goes to Paris, where he pretends to be, you know, kind of a middle-class secretary type person. But in pretending to do that, he figures out how, through pretense, to woo the daughter of the family he works for that's wealthy and influential. And he's always pretending or trying to fool people into believing he's something that he's not, oftentimes with really damaging consequences for the people
who he fools. And so I chose the red and the black as my example of a character who is in disguise or who depends on disguise, even though those disguises aren't physical. So this was a lot of fun for me. I really enjoyed this tag. Again, it's the Hobbies and Pastimes book tag. It was created by Marc Nash. I saw it on Old Blues Chapter and Verse. The link to both of those channels both those channels' videos would be in the description below. Please let me know what you think of the books I chose, and thank you for watching.